Hello and welcome. Tonight, Lagos schools to reopen for students in transition classes on August the 3rd. National prayers against COVID-19 begins with Jumat services in Abuja. Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria released new guidelines for air travelers and other airport users. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says easing of lockdown restrictions in England is the biggest step yet on the road to recovery. Plus, business and news from Abuja, the FCT, and later from our studios in London.
On business news tonight, Central Bank of Nigeria asked lenders to bid for forex at 380 naira to a dollar from a previous rate of 360 naira.
On sports news tonight, Nigerian and Indiana Pacers shooting guard Victor Oladipo is sitting out the 2019-2020 NBA season restart in Orlando, Florida.
And from the nation's capital, President Buhari writes world leaders over their support towards helping Nigeria attain wild poliovirus-free status.
It's official. Schools in Lagos State will now resume come August the 3rd. The state governor, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, who announced this today, however, says the resumption only affects students in transitional classes who are preparing for their certificate examinations. The governor is asking school authorities to use the time between now and August the 3rd to make perfect all necessary arrangements for a seamless resumption in line with laid down protocols for COVID-19.
It's been over 4 months since schools in Lagos State have been shut due to the coronavirus pandemic. Since then, the state has been the epicenter of the virus. Online learning have been the new normal for students, and the state governor, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, is ready to reopen schools for students in transition classes.
Students in the transitional classes who have the mandatory public examinations ahead of them will be permitted to resume. For revision classes and of course for the examination. All educational establishments are to follow the established public health guidelines and protocols for the reopening. Students impacted by these directives will be in the transitional class of JS3, SS3, and Tech 3, the the technical education schools 3 as well. The commencement dates for this will be from Monday, August the 3rd, 2020.
As at last week Friday, this was the breakdown of cases at each local government area of the state.
Places of worship will continue to remain closed in Lagos for some more time in the future. All social and event centers, social clubs will also continue to remain closed for now.
As the numbers continue to rise, Governor Sanwo-Olu says those flouting safety guidelines on COVID-19 will be arrested.
The mask usage is mandatory at public places. We are also asking officers and businesses and commercial premises to refuse entry to any persons who is not wearing their face mask, and in line with the Presidential Task Force directive on no mask, no entry, no mask, no service. Enforcement agencies will, from the coming days and week, charge defaulters to court as the period of grace is over.
The battle to contain the deadly virus is a huge task for the Lagos State government, and the governor is appealing to residents to be responsible for themselves and others to stop the spread.
Meanwhile, in Abuja, the nation's capital, the federal government has kicked off its spiritual intervention for COVID-19 with a Jumat service at the National Mosque. The chief imam of the National Mosque, Alhaji Mohammed Kabir, is optimistic that with the measures already put in place by the government, coupled with prayer, the nation will overcome the pandemic.
This is not just the regular Jumat prayers held by Muslims in this mosque every Friday. In accordance with the directives of the Nigeria Interreligious Council, NIREC, for Muslims and Christians across the country to embark on a 3-day national prayers against COVID-19, Islamic faithfuls are offering this special prayer at the National Mosque in Abuja. The Imam of Abuja National Mosque is leading the prayers here. Some dignitaries, including the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory and some members of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, are also in attendance. For some of the dignitaries here, this is a time to seek God's face for a solution.
Certainly, turning to God in difficult moments, who is in custody of our affairs, who is the sustainer and cherisher of our world, who is the fashioner of our lives. Our fortune and future is in his hands. I think it's a step in the right direction.
As Muslims, whatever happens to man, it is in the knowledge of our Creator. So in a situation like this, always we are now returning back to our Creator to come to our aid, because He knows best and He is the cure for everything. So we did today's prayer specially asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy upon the entire humanity to relieve this COVID-19 pandemic.
But can prayers alone really help Nigeria to defeat this virus?
This has not relieved us of our own responsibility as human beings, both individually and collectively, to take responsibility and ensure that we do not spread this COVID-19 by ourselves. Neither have we become complacent in matters of national security.
We provided all the sanitizers and thermometer just to show an example to everybody that this pandemic is not a joke. The only way to curtail it is by applying all the advices given by the NCDC and other health organizations.
Nigeria has been battling COVID-19 for 4 months since the index case was reported on February 27th this year, and the call for a national prayers against the virus is unique among the lists of government interventions.
And more Nigerians stranded outside the country are making their way back courtesy of the federal government. This time, 86 more have arrived in the nation's capital, Abuja, from Sudan, following their evacuation from that country. According to the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, the evacuees who arrived in the early hours of today all tested negative for COVID-19. They would, however, remain in 14-day isolation before reuniting with their families. Before now, the Nigerians were evacuated from Sudan on June the 26th, most of them students. About 2,000 Nigerians have so far been evacuated from various parts of the world, amongst those that have indicated interest to return home following the pandemic. And staying with our coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic ahead of the resumption of domestic air travel on July the 8th, the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria, FAN, have released new guidelines for air travelers and other airport users. The new standard operating procedure is aimed at protecting all stakeholders and preventing further spread of the COVID-19 virus. In the new normal, departing passengers must arrive in the airport properly kitted with their face masks. They must also ensure a minimum of 1.5-meter physical distancing. Aviation medical or port health personnel will screen each passenger for temperature and ensure the use of face masks. Passengers are required to submit luggage for disinfection before entry into the departure halls. The airport is also asking travelers to wash their hands as often as possible, as hand sanitizers have been provided for passengers before entry at the waiting halls, at the lounges, and the pre-boarding gates. For arriving passengers, they must disembark from the aircraft, observe physical distancing as they board the buses, while disinfected trolleys will be made available for them to carry their luggage outside. FAN says all these measures are necessary to achieve the healthy and safe air travel. And still on air travel, the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, NCAA, warns that no airline will resume operations without fulfilling and complying with safety guidelines and protocols given to them. The Director General of the NCAA, Captain Musa Nuhu, who gave the warning during an interactive session with the Senate Committee on Aviation at the National Assembly, says inspectors are physically verifying aircrafts to ensure that airlines adhere to these protocols and guidelines. He also says pilots are well trained for the resumption of flights, and the agency is putting in place several measures to protect air passengers during flights. The Minister of Health, Dr. Osage Ehanire, says the Federal Ministry of Health requires a special fund of about 200 million naira to fund drug research in the ongoing fight against COVID-19. He said this during an interactive session with the House of Representatives Ad Hoc Committee on the Disease. He explains that the major challenge in finding solutions to the coronavirus disease is lack of funds for research and development in the country.
The National Health Research Committee has developed a costed work plan of 200 million naira only for COVID-19 research for the year 2020. And I will here add that we have the Department of Traditional, Complementary and Alternative Medicine, which is also not left out of all this research conversation. The overwhelming majority of what we get is not cash. Even if you hear 2 million, it's not coming in cash, it's coming in materials. So a lot of the donors actually tell you we are giving you this, but what do you want? They go and buy it and give you. So as far as money, even the CACOVID, the coalition of COVID-19, they tell you what you want, they pay for it. So the cash is coming in is not correct. It's a misconception. So hardly anything in cash really comes in. But the 200 million that we're talking about for research is only for COVID. It's not the overall budget for research. I think I wanted to make that clear, that the PTF put that money aside for research, for COVID-related research. But every other research organization has its own budget. This is not to say that the budget is sufficient, because research is not something that actually yields.
To Plateau State now, where the Chief of Staff to the Plateau State Governor has tested positive for COVID-19 following the test conducted for members of the State Executive Council. Mr. Noel Donjo is, however, said to be asymptomatic and is currently at one of the isolation centers in the state capital, Jos, while members of his family and other contacts are being traced and tested. Other personal aides of the governor, permanent secretaries, heads of parastatals, as well as other senior civil servants, have also been tested and are awaiting their results. According to Governor Lalong, residents must continue to adhere strictly to the guidelines issued to curtail the virus. In part two, after the break, Cross River State prepares for second phase of COVID-19 management despite its COVID-19 free status. Please stay with us. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10, live on Channels Television, Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. Lagos schools to reopen for students in transition classes on August the 3rd. National prayer against COVID-19 begins with Jumat service in Abuja. Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria releases new guidelines for air travelers and other airport users. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says easing of lockdown restrictions in England is the biggest step to the road of recovery. Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Please subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser. or download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple TV, Android TV, Fire TV, and Roku. The Cross River State Governor, Professor Ben Ayade, has commended President Muhammadu Buhari, the NCDC, the Federal Ministry of Health, and the state COVID-19 Response Task Force for the skillful management of the pandemic. The governor expressed delight at the state that it has so far remained free of the virus, irrespective of being surrounded by Cameroon and states with confirmed cases surrounding it.
We want to put on record that we are particularly grateful to the Federal Ministry of Health and to NCDC for being a great example, for playing a very professional technical role and giving a world-class response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Nigeria has led Africa and have demonstrated full commitment and have shown a classic response. For us as a state, our own lockdown have just started. Because by opening our borders and by opening the airways, Cross River that is COVID-19 free will have an avalanche. I see it coming because at this point, we no longer have control over our borders. By today, we have surrendered to the supremacy of the federal government by causing us to open our borders. This message, therefore, is to say that you have our vehicles back on the road and the COVID-19 team back on the road. While the borders are open, our eyes will remain open. While the borders are open, our medical professionals will remain open. We must continue to stay on our borders. We must continue to police them.
In continuation of their contribution to the fight against COVID-19 in the country, one of Nigeria's leading conglomerates, BUA Group, has donated 6 ambulances, food items, and 100 million naira each to the Kwara and River State government. Kwara State Governor Abdul Rahman Abdul Razak, while appreciating the gesture of the Executive Chairman of BUA Group, Mr. Abdul Samad Rabiu, says the donations will strengthen the state's fight against the pandemic.
The numbers are not going down, so we need to flatten the curve. This equipment we're receiving today is part of what is going to help us flatten the curve, but it's important we all take personal responsibility for this. As the economy opens up, the federal government has announced partial opening of schools, which is coming soon, for the students that will be taking the exams. Very soon the ministries will open up, but as we go along, government is opening up to ease the economy, to kickstart the economy.
For the governor of River State, Nyesom Wike, the donation by BUA Group is highly commended and serves as a testament of the company's commitment to combat the deadly virus. Governor Wike thanks BUA Group for their sustained support to the state government and assures them of an enabling environment for all business to thrive. Since the beginning of the pandemic, BUA Group has committed about $20 million to tackle the coronavirus in Nigeria. And now we join our studios in Abuja, where Ibrahim Adra is on hand with more stories. Hello, Ibrahim.
Olimide, thanks a lot and welcome everyone. President Muhammadu Buhari has written world leaders and partners to appreciate their support towards helping Nigeria attain a wild polio virus-free status, and he is promising that his administration would sustain the momentum and strengthen the primary healthcare system. The president also commended Vice President Professor Emil Shibajo, Chairman Presidential Task Force on Polio Eradication, and his team for making Nigeria proud and saving the country from the scourge of poliomyelitis. He asked the task force to sustain the coordination, especially in mobilizing state governors to provide the needed oversight and resources to strengthen the primary healthcare system. And now to legal matters. There is a new twist to the ongoing trial of kidnapped kingpin Chukwudumeme Onwamadike, also known as Evans, as an Ikeja High Court in Lagos has asked the Office of the Public Defender OPD to take over the defense over his alleged inability to afford legal fees. The Lagos State Attorney General, Mr. Moyoshere Onigbanjo, SAN, told the court that the team placed a phone call to Evans' legal team on the last court date to inquire about the whereabouts of Evans' counsel. Justice Hakim Oshodi thereafter noted that Evans had developed a habit of engaging the services of lawyers who, according to the judge, disappeared halfway through trial, and this has caused delays in the case. He is standing trial alongside 4 others over the alleged kidnap of Mr. Donatus Dunu, the Chief Executive Officer of Maydon Pharmaceutical Limited. Meanwhile, the United States Department of Justice has confirmed that Nigerian cybercrime suspect Ramon Abbas, also known as Ray Hush Puppy, has made his first appearance in court in Chicago today. The United States Department of Justice says the 37-year-old is expected to be transferred to Los Angeles in the coming weeks to face criminal charges. Hush Puppy, a Dubai resident, was arrested last month by UAE security agencies for allegedly conspiring to launder hundreds of millions of dollars from business email compromise BEC frauds and other scams, including schemes targeting a U.S. law firm, a foreign bank, and an English Premier League club. Hush Puppy was then extradited to the United States and taken into custody by FBI special agents earlier this week. And if convicted, the conspiracy to engage in money laundering, Abbas would face a statutory maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. Meanwhile, the arrest of Hush Puppy by Dubai Interpol may help to resolve some cyber crimes he is alleged to have masterminded. But this has also created problems for some Nigerians living in that country. Nigerian youth and business owners in the UAE say they are at risk of being blacklisted by financial institutions, a move which could make their legitimate transactions in the country problematic. Channels Television Dubai correspondent Mayowa Deguke reports.
Hush Puppy's sensational arrest in Dubai and the subsequent attention it gained in UAE media appears to have made a bad situation much worse. That's according to well-meaning Nigerian youths and business owners living here.
Now, the spotlight is going to be on Nigerian businessmen and account holders in this country. Okay, now you cannot legitimately do anything without, you know, the spotlight. Okay, people will begin to suspect you.
My husband also had a similar account incident where he couldn't open a corporate account after having a business here for about 3 years.
Prior to this arrest, which involved a number of other African cyber criminals, Nigerians in the country claimed to have been blacklisted by financial institutions, making it near impossible for them to open bank accounts or acquire loans.
Those who came into this country, the UAE, just with a Nigerian passport, without having any foreign validation, you know, they go through a very difficult time just opening up a simple bank account in a way that is not the same for even Ghanaians.
On Nigeria's social media, many accuse the Dubai police of exploiting a wrong perception about Nigerians being criminals. Others disagree.
If I ran a government and we were going to go after people like that, and we went after them and we got them, we would publicize it just to let you know that this country is not a safe haven for your type of fraudster.
When you're talking about someone who has been so famous on Instagram for showing himself as I am one of the people on Instagram with all of, you know, like the cars and the fancy life and everything, to try to attract more and more victims.
The whole operation was definitely more than just those 2 people or even the 12 people arrested. So there has to be a bigger network just to recruit, for example, money mules. So those are the people that will receive some money on their accounts or open up fake accounts with the banks and then receive the money and transfer it further. The classical money laundering. And of course, let's call it foot soldier. So there's probably 50 people involved.
Upon extradition to the United States of America, the fate of Hush Puppy and his associate Woodbury remain yet unknown. In the meantime, the big question is how Nigeria's already tarnished image in the UAE can be redeemed.
Everybody was celebrating the politicians, everybody celebrated. You don't even know his pedigree. You don't know his intellectual capability. You don't know his educational background. You don't know his history. But everybody wants to associate with him because he has money.
From Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Mayowa Adegoke for Channels Television News.
Many thanks indeed, Mayowa. Let's return to Olumide in our Lagos studios for the rest of the news at 10.
Thank you, Ibrahim. To politics now. The National Youth Service Corps, NYSC, has issued a new certificate to Governor Godwin Obaseki of Edo State following an official request by him for rectification and reissuance of the new certificate. The governor took part in the scheme in 1980, but there was an error on the certificate issued to him with an alphabet missing in his surname, which read Obasek instead of Obaseki. The APC All Progressives Congress panel, which screened aspirants for the Edo 2020 primary election, had cited this error as one of the reasons for disqualifying the governor from the race, a decision which made him defect to the People's Democratic Party, where he contested and won the primary election. Meanwhile, the People's Democratic Party National Working Committee has appointed Rivers State Governor Nyesom Wike as chairman of the Edo State Governorship Election National Campaign Council. The party also appointed Adamawa State Governor Amadu Fintiri as the deputy chairman of the council. Serving Governor Godwin Obaseki will face Mr. Osage Ezeyamu of the All Progressives Congress as well as other contenders in the September 19th governorship election in the state. When the news at 10 returns, Central Bank of Nigeria asks lenders to bid for Forex at 380 Naira to $1 from previous rate of 360 Naira. That's on Business News. Please join us again. Welcome back. To security in the northeastern region of the country. Another camp of Boko Haram terrorists has come under intense airstrike by the Air Task Force of Operation Lafia Dole, this time at the Menyakere on the fringes of Sambisa Forest in Borno State. In what the military describes as a precision strike, the meeting venue of the terrorists, along with other structures, were destroyed, while several of their fighters were neutralized. The coordinator of the Defense Media Operations, Major General John Eneche, says the targeted structures were used to plan and launch attacks as well as on houses by some of the fighters. The airstrikes are said to have been used to launch what is said to be a subsidiary operation, Long Reach 2, in the northeast. In a related development, the military says troops of Operation Safe Haven have killed 2 suspected notorious armed robbers around Rock Haven General area in Jos North local government area of Plateau State. They had engaged the robbers in a firefight that is, resulting in the death of 2 persons while others fled with bullet wounds. In the southwest, Oyo State Governor Seyi Makinde is worried about the frequent flash floods in the state, and he's directed the Ibadan Urban Flood Management Project to come up with a drainage master plan to stop the menace. Our correspondent, Bukola Oriowo, reports.
The delegation visits affected areas which include Uchiomi, Ikumapai, Oludu, and Onipapaya bridges at Sawmill, all in Ibadan. Houses, shops, and roadside stalls were submerged. However, work has already begun in some of the affected areas with equipment being deployed to widen the waterways. At the Onipapaya axis of Alakia Road, stalled construction work contributed largely to the flooding in that area. Residents lament several months of hardship from traffic chaos to flooding.
Place where the water follow under the express, that is the main problem that we have.
Having seen the damage done himself, Governor Seyi Makinde assured residents in affected areas that he has directed the local government chairman to begin work on the affected bridges immediately to ease the hardship on the people. He also adds that the Ministry of Environment would enumerate the properties affected by the flood at Uludu with a view to relocating some of the residents to other areas.
This they've been identified, and I think we have to keep taking them out one at a time. So I've asked the local government chairman for them to write for approval, and then work will start immediately on it. IUFMP, they are already dredging the river.
On structures obstructing the waterways, the governor hints that some of them would have to be taken out to allow free flow of water, while urging people living close to flood-prone areas to vacate such places to avoid loss of lives and property. Bukola Oriowo, Channels Television News.
It's time for business news now. Here's Bisi Adebayo.
Welcome to Business News. The Central Bank of Nigeria says it will auction foreign exchange to lenders at 380 naira to a dollar, and that's 5% above the 360 naira official rate as it seeks to unify the country's multiple exchange rates. The financial regulator, in a memo to lenders today, explains that the rate move is in line with the bank's resolve to unify the exchange rates across all forex windows. Nigeria's foreign reserves lost about $8.5 billion to sit at about $36 billion in May due to an increase in imports from last year and demand from investors exiting treasury bills. And talking about the forex reserves now, latest figures from the CBN actually shows that they fell from $36.57 billion on June the 1st to $36.2 billion on June the 29th, representing a margin of about $373.23 million. According to the CBN, the reserves maintained a steady rise at a level of $33.52 billion as at April the 30th, before commencing its downward trend in June. It adds that the reserves hit a high of $45.17 billion on June the 11th and lost $11 billion to close at $33.89 billion as at April the 28th. A total of 609.13 billion naira has been spent by the federal government on servicing domestic debt between January and March 2020, and that's according to latest data by the Debt Management Office. While giving further breakdown, the DMO says that interest paid on treasury bills was 111.6 billion naira, while FGN bonds got 488.9 billion naira, and 392.7 billion naira was paid to FGN savings bonds. The data shows that debt service totaled 251.35 billion naira in January, 158.12 billion naira in February, and 199.65 billion naira in March. Nigerian traders in Ghana have estimated losses worth billions of naira following the closure of their businesses for 8 months. A representative of the traders, Mark Yodo, while speaking with Channels Television, laments the incessant attacks and closure of Nigerian businesses by Ghanaian authorities. He asked the federal government to intervene on the matter urgently.
From facts on ground, evidences we've seen, and even those that are pretty close to us as friends, that we know them, if you are to convert it to Naira, it's in millions. It's in tens of millions. It's quite, they've lost quite, you can imagine what happens there, what happens within 8 months for about 600 shops. These figures are tentative, about 600 shops. You know what it means. And that place is in the heart of the city. It's a commercially viable environment, you know. It's a booming place. There's always transaction activities, things always going on. There are those that are into accessories, those that are into phones, those that sell other wares around, even food vendors and what have you. You understand? Oh, if you are to do in quantum, equate to what they've lost, it's quite huge.
And let's head to the markets now. And the volume of shares traded at the local equities market dropped by 19.88%. And that's just as the all-share index declined further by 0.16%. Temple Ashaju has details of today's trading activities.
Thank you for joining us again on the Stock Market Report. And the bearish run on stocks continued today as investors shift attention from the marketplace to taking a wait-and-see approach on the events in the macro economy. Part of the reasons for this development is the rise in exchange rate and the risk-off sentiments of some foreign portfolio investors who are concerned about the ways and means of their dividend repatriation. Other internal issues include the suspended hike in electricity tariff and the recent increase in the price of petrol to 143 naira 80 kobo per litre. Now, these are some of the developments on the radar of our investors as they aim to see further fiscal and monetary responses from the government regarding all of this situation. But back to the numbers. The 16 basis points decline in today's trading session also widens the year-to-date losses of the exchange to 9.34% despite the slight renewed interest that we saw today on the banking stocks. And that's your stock market report. I'm Temple Ashaju.
And that's it on business news. It's back to you, Olumide.
Thank you, BC. One more important story on COVID-19. Online learning appears to be receiving priority in this period from the government of Kano State. For them, this is a way to not only keep the students busy, but also ensure that the process of transferring knowledge continues during the pandemic. In this report, we'll take a look at the virtual learning and attention it's getting in Kano State.
Kano State is the epicenter for coronavirus in the northwest region of Nigeria. The state has been through lots of trouble since the outbreak of the pandemic. And as the nation begins to think through reopening the economy, schools, mosques and churches, key interest groups are also thinking about the best way to go about this project. Kano government believes that before that exercise begins, the students should not be left idle, and the solution for them is online learning.
We have introduced online teaching, particularly for our students at home. And in the course of these preparations, we got some interventions from UNICEF and DFID. They also extended the coverage to secondary school, primary school education.
The schools have bought into this idea of online studies, and they are putting in their best to ensure that learning is taking place at this crucial period.
It's a different medium of reaching out to the kids than teachers are used to. So we had to train the teachers before the first video was ever shot of how to talk to the students, how to even exchange pleasantries with them, how to make them feel comfortable watching their class through a screen.
It's a mix of feelings for the students themselves, who believe the exercise is of great benefit to them, but of course, there are some hindrances.
I am doing lessons on radio and television, English and mathematics.
I prefer the classroom because it makes me understand and pay more attention.
I'm in SS1. I used to watch the lessons Mondays and Thursdays, but because there's no light, that's why I don't used to follow it sometimes.
Once the schools reopen, there will be needs to comply with some restrictions already put in place by the NCDC. Social distancing should be the order of the day. Washing of hands must be done as often as possible. Wearing a face mask is very essential, and keeping 2 meters distance is imperative. But how this can be achieved among students is the big task before the school management and the students.
Still ahead on the news at 10. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says easing of lockdown restrictions in England is the biggest step yet on the road to recovery. Plus, more stories from our London studio with Around the World in 5. Do stay with us. Welcome back. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the easing of lockdown restrictions in England is the biggest step yet on the road to recovery. But he also says the public must not let businesses down when many, including pubs, restaurants, hairdressers and cinemas, reopen their doors. Here's Simon Pusey with more international news and around the world in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. The US has recorded its largest single-day jump in infections since the start of the pandemic, with more than 53,000 cases reported in just 24 hours. The number is a new global record for the coronavirus pandemic. According to the World Health Organization, the global number of infections has now reached more than 10.5 million. The two main clusters have been reported in Florida and California, where Los Angeles is seeing what experts are calling an explosion in the number of cases. Meanwhile, Latin America has reported more than 2.7 million cases, while the World Bank is warning that in the South American continent, the recession will see the worst downturn since reliable data began in 1901. And India has reached a new record number of daily infections, with more than 20,000 cases reported for the first time since the pandemic reached the country. The southern states of Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu are among the worst affected areas. The country could soon overtake Russia to have the third highest number of infections in the world. China has appointed a new hardline figure as head of its new security agency in Hong Kong. Zhang Yanxiong will be the head of the agency, which will answer directly to Beijing. The agency is being set up to enforce a new draconian security law passed this week in Hong Kong. In response to the new law, Hong Kong pro-democracy activists are discussing a plan to create an unofficial parliament in exile. According to the activists, this would be to keep the flame of freedom alive and send a message to China that freedom cannot be crushed. 20 Saudi nationals have gone on trial in absentia in Turkey over the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The writer, who was a vocal critic of Saudi Arabia's powerful crown prince Mohammed bin Salman, was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in October 2018. Saudi Arabia carried out a separate trial over the killing that was heavily criticised as incomplete. Turkish prosecutors accused the former deputy head of Saudi intelligence, Ahmed al-Asiri, and the royal court's media advisor, Saud al-Qahtani, of having led the operation. Almost 200 workers have been caught up in a series of explosions at a fireworks factory in northwest Turkey that has left at least 2 people dead. The blaze was ignited by a powerful initial blast in what was described as an industrial accident. It was not immediately clear what triggered the explosions, which were heard as far away as 50 kilometres. The French Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, has resigned ahead of a government reshuffle by President Emmanuel Macron. Experts argue the president acted on a pledge to reinvent his administration and win back disillusioned voters ahead of a possible re-election bid in 2022. Macron is reshaping his government as France grapples with the deepest economic depression since World War II, a sharp downturn that will shrink the economy by about 11% in 2020. A new UN report has found that the world dumped a record 53.6 million tonnes of electronic waste last year and recycled only 17.4%. The Global E-Waste Monitor 2020 report found that China, India and the United States were by far the biggest contributors to e-waste, holding almost 40% of the global production. According to the report, the overall damage done to the environment from all the unrecycled waste may be incalculable, but it estimated that almost 100 million tonnes of carbon dioxide waste was released into the atmosphere last year alone. Botswana is investigating the deaths of hundreds of elephants which have died in mysterious circumstances. Poaching has been ruled out as the carcasses were found intact. Government figures put the elephant death toll at 275, but National Park Rescue reported a number higher than 400. Africa's overall elephant population is declining due to heavy poaching, but Botswana has seen numbers growing in recent decades. Doctors treating COVID-19 patients in Sierra Leone have gone on strike over unpaid bonuses, leaving patients in some of the main treatment centres without care. The strike masks an escalation in a row between doctors and government over what doctors say is a misuse of funds for the coronavirus response in the country and a lack of protection and compensation for health workers. Doctors say they were promised hazard pay for their work during the outbreak, but that pay has not materialised. And finally, daring Sri Lankan tuk-tuk drivers have put their three-wheeled vehicles to the test in a gruelling race through the city streets and off-road jungle terrain in the annual Tuk-It race. The race lasts 2 days and has attracted 237 teams of 3 people, despite the current coronavirus pandemic. The crews completed a tough 140-kilometre-long route that took them through a spectacular obstacle course, the Sri Lankan jungle and various cities along the way. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel studios in Lagos.
Thank you, Simon. We'll turn our attention to sports news now. Here's Jeffrey Uzona.
Thanks, Olumide, and welcome to the exciting world of sports. Indiana Pacers shooting guard Victor Oladipo will not join his teammate for the NBA restart season in Orlando, Florida. Oladipo had been hesitant to join the Pacers at Disney due to the risk of a possible injury on his tendon, which kept him out for a year. The 28-year-old Nigerian appeared in 13 games since his return before the coronavirus pandemic suspended action. Leroy Sané says winning the Champions League with Bayern Munich is his top priority after completing his move to the Allianz Arena. The German winger joins from Manchester City for an initial fee of about £44.7 million that could rise to £54 million, and said after his unveiling that he wants to win as many trophies as possible with the Bavarians. Sané, who has 21 caps for Germany, will start training with Bayern Munich next week, although he cannot play for them in the Champions League this season. Lewis Hamilton has laid down an emphatic marker on Formula One's opening weekend by topping practice 1 and 2 at the Austrian Grand Prix. On a day the black Mercedes made its debut, Hamilton enjoyed a perfect start to his 7th Formula One title quest by dominating both practice sessions. Hamilton's teammate, Valtteri Bottas, was 2 seconds behind him, while the nearest non-Mercedes car, driven by Sergio Perez, of Racing Point trailed by more than half a second. And that's it on sports. I'm Jeffrey Uzango. It's back to you, Olumide.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And now to entertainment news, where Nigerian international act Wizkid is set to premiere his highly anticipated album. Ekaite Afia has details and other entertainment stories. And the main news again. The Lagos State government today said schools are to reopen for students in transition classes on August the 3rd. Churches and mosques will, however, remain shut. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson today said the easing of lockdown restrictions in England is the biggest step yet on the road to recovery. And that's it on the news at 10 tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay. You have a good night.